Hello and welcome. I'm Paul Skeldon, the editor at Telemedia News. I'm not joined by my colleague Jarvis Todd. He's taking a much-earned rest after the fantastic World Telemedia Show in Marbella, I believe 2 weeks ago. The time has flown by. So I'm flying solo. What I'm going to do today is just go through some of the things that I found most interesting at World Telemedia, because there's a lot going on in the industry, and it was an interesting gathering at the Hard Rock Hotel down there in Marbella, where I felt a lot of key themes we've been talking about for a number of years all started to really coalesce and come together. So I'm just going to run through some of the highlights for me. Obviously, there's a huge amount that went on down there. There's probably much more to talk about, but the things that stood out for me really centered around the way there are kind of three central pillars now to telemedia, and they all very clearly sort of are starting to interlock, often generating great business opportunities. There are some challenges with it, however, as well. I'm going to look at today some of the key things I found around the world of content, first of all, around messaging, which has a sort of pertinence with the content as well, because it's sort of how a lot of the content services are marketed and pushed out there. And of course, payments and how people pay for these services. Now, of course, around the edges of this, there's a whole sort of almost sort of semi-separate world of business messaging, which has become quite a key part of the telemedia business as well. Not to mention the sort of advertising side. There's a huge representation from Google this time, which is, I think, very encouraging for the event itself, but also just shows how central Google now is as the sort of place where all the traffic comes from for a lot of these content services. I shall weave those in where appropriate into what I'm going to discuss, but really I'm going to focus on sort of how the content world has shifted, how the web messaging world has shifted, and how payments is working around that as well, because they work all as a whole, and it's thrown up some quite interesting opportunities, I think, and as I say, some quite interesting challenges. From a content point of view, I think that really struck me talking to a number of people, Click Mobile, Seriously Fresh Media, Sports Locker, among others, is that the world of content, it was dominated not so long ago by really sort of short form stuff. It's now very much sort of short form, long form, in-depth, and sort of general stuff. A lot of it centered around sports, but there are other verticals that are also particularly promising, but it's this sort of mixture. There's a smorgasbord of content types, and some of it is really granular and really sort of niche, while other parts of it are very sort of universal. I'm talking to Julia DeMambro from Seriously Fresh. Her view is that there is this vast amount of content of different lengths and different levels of detail, different niches around sport and health and well-being and even education, showbiz, entertainment, all of those sorts of things, the usual suspects that you'd imagine. And it's not driven by kind of having to sort of have cheap or short or cheap and short or anything like that. It's all to do with content that's sticky and that people are going to come back for and keep repeat paying for. So I think it's an interesting development, because I say a year ago talking about this, it was really about getting volume of content out there, but now it's really about getting that return business. Now, I think part of that is the sort of global economic situation where things are a little tighter than perhaps they were. So those investing in content are trying to get sort of a better return on investment by having people coming back to view it. But I think equally, it's trying to sort of build more than just that snackable throwaway sort of thing. It's about getting more of a sort of involvement. And I think a lot of this has been driven by how the big streamers like Netflix and Prime and those sorts of people have built a content model around their brand, and people do keep coming back, and they make it sticky. And that's starting to filter down into even sort of short form and low cost stuff. The other interesting side of content model is this increasing focus on sports and esports. I mean, sports is just super popular, and where there's a lot of it on sort of mainstream platforms here in the UK, BT Sport, for example, but Sky Sports and those sorts of things that are quite expensive. You have to be, dedicated to want to pay to watch it. There's this whole world of people who want the background information and behind the scenes and locker room stuff and punditry and stats. And that's spawned a whole market in content. Niche sports, similarly, are also exploding, and this has been sort of another interesting development. These sorts of things fit beautifully with what Seriously Fresh was saying about this sort of repeat business stickiness, RSF news type feeds, because you get that behind the scenes, you get that ongoing statistical stuff, that ongoing analysis, that ongoing sort of gossip around, say, football. You have people coming back for more, so we're starting to see a lot of that going on. It's particularly prevalent in developing markets. We talked to Click Mobile, who are based in Malawi, service sort of several markets in Africa. They see very much the same thing, that sport, be it like huge club football stuff from Europe, right down to really local things in sort of individual regions within an individual country in Africa. It's very popular. And again, it's not just the goal highlights and the matches, it's all the peripheral stuff around it, which is particularly interesting, I think, in this day and age. As a slight aside on the content thing, before I move on to the messaging side of that and how it fits in, we did see some interesting stuff, or I did at least, about the beginnings of Web3 starting to creep into how telemedia content is out there. It's not big, it's not really even there yet, but it's starting to be talked about. And I think this idea of blockchain-based games and non-fungible tokens, the NFTs, in terms of content and collectibles. We heard from Tony Pierce from Reality Gaming about the whole sort of range of NFT collectibles that are based on blockchain that he's doing around Doctor Who at the BBC and Thunderbirds from ITV and various other sort of retro TV entertainment brands. It's starting to get out there, this idea, I think, that there's another way or another sort of dimension to content. And I think we saw it last year when Sam Media rolled out their HoloVision. I think actually they rolled it out in Barcelona in February, but it's nearly a year ago, where they're looking at the sort of metaverse side of things and trying to explore a more immersive platform. I think we have got in the gaming world this sort of NFT and immersive sort of view. And talking to Tony from Reality Gaming, he does see that this Web3 concept, which is a more immersive, more interactive version of the web, is going to start to impact content. It's prevalent in gaming, but I think it's a short step before that starts to infiltrate other aspects. And so as a bit of a side, I think it's probably not even going to be talking about it in any great detail next year at World Telemedia, but I think in 25, 26, maybe we are going to see a lot more forays into this. I think it adds a whole new dimension to the kind of content and services that can be sold. So one to keep an eye out for there. The second sort of pillar of this that really interested me at the show, it was about messaging. There's a lot going on in messaging. As I said at the beginning, there's a whole sort of cohort of people focusing on business messaging and the A2P stuff that's all automated, sort of verification, SMSs and all that kind of thing, which is becoming, big business. On the other side of it, there's the use of messaging as a marketing and interaction tool. To take the former, the business messaging side of things, I think, as we heard from many of the people across the SMS forum part of the show, while OTT messaging, so WhatsApp, that kind of thing, is growing and important, SMS still dominates. Of course it does. It works everywhere on everybody's phone. It's an ideal way of doing it. It's big business. It's certainly big business for the MNOs, particularly with this A2P SMSing for verification of one-time passcodes, all that kind of thing. I mean, it's just everywhere. And quite rightly, it works really well. The downside, I think, is that as with anything that's really successful, you start to see fraud creeping in. And there is a growing issue with SMS that there is a lot of artificial inflation of traffic and SMS pumping going on. In fact, a separate story out this week, just by coincidence, from Juniper Research, we published this morning. They estimate the wire SMS revenues have grown for MNOs for the past sort of 5 years at around 10% a year. It's probably likely to drop to about 4% in 2024 because businesses are starting to sort of step back a bit from using SMS because MNOs have raised their prices because of the problems they've had with artificial inflation of traffic. It's an issue that's brewing. It's something that was sort of openly talked about at World Telemedia, that there are people there sort of trying to flog artificially inflated traffic. It is becoming an issue, and I think it's one that it's just going to play into the hands of WhatsApp and RCS, those sorts of services that will start to grow. I mean, there are other organic reasons why they'll grow because the people are using them, they're easy to use, etc., etc. However, I think if problems arise with SMS, it will see businesses shift over to using these other forms of messaging. That's not to say, of course, that as those become successful, people who are looking to game the system will also start to find ways of defrauding WhatsApp and RCS and Telegram and anything else you can think of. So it's not really a solvable problem. It's one to keep an eye on. But it's quite interesting how that is having the beginnings of a sort of impact on the revenues that MNOs are making from this sort of surge in SMS, and something that's sort of important, I think, to watch. The other side of this, though, is how messaging is, in my mind, something that's very useful and used a lot in terms of marketing. But in fact, in reality, it's not at all. There's a tiny proportion of the world's businesses, as Nick Lane from Mobile Squared pointed out, actually use SMS as a marketing channel, let alone WhatsApp or RCS or any of these other things that we talk about a lot as being particularly good for marketing. And I think as we've seen these sort of surging content models, we're going to see more of these services having to be marketed. Are they going to use SMS or RCS or WhatsApp or any of these other ones? And it appears that currently, no, it's not on people's radar. However, it is going to be. And Mr. Lane did predict very sort of emphatically that 2026, we are going to see the beginnings of quite a surge as businesses get hold of the idea of messaging as a marketing channel. Now, of course, issues with AIT and pumping that are affecting the A2P side of messaging, will they have an impact on how businesses view using SMS as a marketing tool? Possibly, but I still think there's an ample opportunity in there for growth, and that was something that we sort of like touched on a lot at the show. How these things are sort of starting to come together, and particularly what the impact they then have on CPaaS, because it starts to become a authentication tool, as we've discussed. It becomes a customer service tool. It also becomes a marketing tool, and that's going to put some challenges, I think, on the CPaaS side of it. And as Fabrizio from Horizon sort of pointed out to me, and in the most recent issue of Telemedia magazine, it's going to see a surge in the use of very specifically trained chatbots to handle particularly customer service inquiries, but I guess sort of the upshot of marketing as well. So we're going to see chatbots start to emerge that are trained very specifically to handle, say, car insurance queries, or I downloaded this piece of content, it doesn't work, sort of queries. So it's a very specific training of generative AI to handle these things. It's going to start to sit behind these services. And I think get that right, and you've got the makings of something really powerful again. Again, though, always the sort of cloud on the horizon of fraud sitting there. And as we shall come to when I talk about the sort of payment side of this in a moment, there is a sort of shift towards impersonation fraud as a new revenue generation area for cyber criminals. So I think we have to be optimistic. There's a lot going on in messaging. A lot can happen with messaging. We're going to see a lot more messages being sent around. However, we have to keep a weather eye on the fraud side of things. Which brings me to payments, the third sort of part of our triumvirate of key themes from Telemedia. Now, carrier billing is growing, booming. It's doing very well worldwide. We heard from a range of people about its successes, often in the developing markets and markets around the Middle East and Africa. However, it's also doing very well in Europe, and it seems to have shaken off its image of being something that's a bit dodgy, and is now increasingly just one of those really useful payment tools that's out there. In fact, the month before World Telemedia, I was at the Direct Carrier Billing Forum in Amsterdam, and there was a litany of network operators from around the world talking about their projects they've undertaken with carrier billing. And sure, in some markets, particularly in Africa, the guy from Click Mobile was saying about in Malawi, the operators do take a massive slice of it. However, there is no alternative way for people to pay currently. So it has to be used, which is driving up its growth. Here in Europe, it's becoming something that's its quick easiness to make those first one-off payments. Its potential is being seen more and more by people selling content and services as an ideal on-ramp. It's a way of getting people in because they can pay quickly for the first thing, and then you can upsell them or move them on to other forms of payment if they so wish. Interestingly, in Germany, the network operators have combined to brand carrier billing as a payment tool, and are doing giveaways of buy one get one free if you buy stuff from a vending machine using carrier billing to promote this. And I think increasingly operators everywhere are starting to see that this is working in Germany. We heard from Democo about how carrier billing is used for hiring bicycles and all sorts of stuff like that, transport payments. And part of its success in Germany is that people now recognize this payment tool. It has a logo. It has a very long, unpronounceable German name, which I won't attempt to give you. But it's, if you read the stuff we've written about this online on Telemedia News, you can follow it up there. But it's starting to give it a huge amount of traction, and this is what people want to see. I think a lot of the content and service providers think that there's going to be a lot more sort of flexibility in using carrier billing. If it's something that consumers recognise, and merchants as well. And I think giving it a name, a brand name that will sit alongside Apple Pay, Google Pay, and PayPal can only help with doing this. And this sort of news was universally well received. There's a whole load of video interviews and things going up on the Telemedia News site from the show, where you can hear what other people have to think about that. We've written extensively about it. There'll be more in the next issue of the magazine. And it's all very helpful. The downside of carrier billing, as I think we're all well aware, because it's sort of something we've talked about for a couple of years now, is as carrier billing has grown, so too has carrier billing fraud. However, interestingly, the companies such as Avena and MCP and others who have worked very hard on using AI and all sorts of other tools to spot and close down these frauds, they've been so successful in not cutting off carrier billing fraud, but certainly keeping it sort of a lid on it, that it's become that carrier billing fraud is not so much of an issue. It's still an issue, but it's something that's less worrying. It's led to the market growing even more. And as I said earlier, it has pushed the fraudsters away from carrier billing fraud, which is great, though they are now looking at impersonation fraud and ad fraud and other ways of doing that defraudation. So I think, again, another trend that sort of came out of the show is this fight against the fraudulent side of things. Is going to increasingly focus on keeping where we are with carrier billing fraud, but also there's going to have to be a renewed focus on ad fraud and impersonation fraud and artificial inflation of traffic and grey routing and all those sorts of things that are starting to impact the messaging and advertising side of traffic delivery and generation. So I think, and that's an interesting theme that we'll explore some more next year. So that's my key takeaways. That's what I found most interesting, I think, at the show. I'm sure that you all got much more out of it. Those of you that went out there, those of you that didn't, we've got more stuff coming up over the coming weeks on the Telemedia News website, looking at these trends in more detail. Some of the other things that have come up. We've got a whole host of video interviews going live over the next couple of weeks that explore some of these themes and some of the other themes that were out there. And I look forward to welcoming my colleague Jarvis back in a couple of weeks' time and hearing what his thoughts were and looking, I guess, at what's been happening and what's happening in the year ahead while we carry on growing and developing the telemedia business. So that was a nice little potted run through what you may have missed out in Marbella. And I look forward to talking to you again in a couple of weeks' time with some more interesting stuff. So thanks for listening and stay tuned. Goodbye.